Hopefully this doesn't kill anything. So the short of it, battery compartment, bunch of breakers in there, PDI unit doing 3 functions. And the newer module is stepping up to supporting lithium. So as far as the wiring down in the basement, this is what I've been able to figure out. So from the battery in the box, the first thing I'll talk about is breaker 1. It runs straight to the electronic jacks. So if you, and that's that big thick green wire. The jack wires seem to be the one wire that's 8 gauge as opposed to 10 gauge. So they just run straight to the jacks. It also means that the jacks are always powered, even if you turn the battery disconnect switch off, the jacks are still active. And at least for me in my upgrade, I went ahead and added a big switch in here so that I could reach into the sewer compartment, and right above the dump valves, I've got a big red switch up in there. I can turn off the jacks.
Is there any parasitic current that's going through that when you're not using the jacks?
I bet you there is, and it's one of the few things I haven't measured. And so if someone goes and measures that, let me know and I'll stick it back in a spreadsheet.
What size switch did you put in there?
I just put one of the big
300 amps
switches in, so it's way overkill, but
yeah, easy to
300
see.
amps. And I have measured the current draw when I'm jacking my camper up. It's all 4 jacks total. It's 25 amps that it's pulling, and then about 5 or 6 amps when you're lowering it.
This is Mark Long. I'd like to mention a safety concern with the jacks being always on, always powered. If you're driving down the road or in a campground or something, and somehow that jack control module gets a signal and turns on, especially if you're driving, that's a serious safety concern. And the reason I mention that is I had a previous camper that thankfully I was parked, but a trucker parked next to me in an electrical storm, activated my hydraulic lift on my camper, Expedition camper. It had this remote control like we have on our Northern Lights, and it activated it, and it ran until it burned the wire out. But this to me is a really serious safety concern, that Northern Light is putting us at risk, not being able to turn this on. In other words, it's always on, and any interference could activate that one or more of those jacks. I think it's crazy that it's set up like this. Anyway,
I think it's,
go ahead,
and I've
Tom.
read some forums raising the same concerns. So I think that was a big reason that I went ahead and added that battery switch in there. So great input there. So electronic jacks, as far as where that jack wire runs in my camper, that line runs clear forward. It goes under the steps and then it runs all the way back to the jack. So it's a real long run. I thought that was interesting. Just a little tip, at least in my 9.6, the underfloor supports, there's actually some cutouts that go right through here. And so when I flip my basement door open, there's actually a channel running right along the top there where you can run wires straight from the closet or the basement below the closet right into under the shower. So if you're needing to sneak a wire through there, that's one place to do it. Just make sure if you run it through there, that you get some clamps and screw it up so you don't accidentally catch it when you slide the tray in and out. So the next thing, the solar charger, I don't show the panels connected to it, but those outputs are also running straight to the battery. And so the solar charger, I don't know if the off switch on it actually turns it off, but it is always connected to the battery. and the battery disconnect switch has no effect. And for lead acid and AGM, this isn't a bad setup because typically you want to keep those kind of batteries topped off and charged. And so to always have your solar charger on, if it's a good one that knows how to do maintenance charging, that's a good setup. For lithium, the general recommendation is you store lithium batteries at 30 to 50% state of charge when you're not using them. And so if you're always running solar power into them, it's not going to really hurt them, but it's not considered ideal. So the next thing, I'm going to skip the battery one for the moment. Oh, I've actually skipped the fridge. For the fridge line, what is labeled as the fridge line in the battery compartment drops down to the battery disconnect switch. The same with the battery line. What's labeled as battery in the battery compartment, it also runs into the disconnect switch, and they're actually tied together. So really these two wires are just acting in parallel. But as far as the fridge, it is connected to the battery disconnect, runs out to the fridge, and of course here's your return. Well, pardon me. The fridge power goes out this way, and then the return loop comes through the battery disconnect switch and then flows through the wires there. So it's interesting, but it's actually very, very common. Northern Light has a negative side battery disconnect switch. And then just a little side note, per code, I learned a lot about this, and Keith at Northern Light gave me some cryptic replies about this. The propane line is actually grounded and basically makes connection with the negative line. And so while you would normally expect the fridge current to go out on the black wire and return exclusively on the white wire, actually some of the current smears over and catches a ride on the copper pipes, goes to the chassis tie downs that's outside the camper, right behind the driver seat. And then it catches a ride back through this set of wires. It's kind of weird. So if you're running around with clamp meters, you're going to see 24 amps. If you have the DC fridge in DC fridge mode, you'll see 24 amps going out. But at least for me, I only see 8 amps or 18 amps coming back on the wire, and the other 6 amps are taking a ride back on the propane lines. Interesting discovery.
So this is Mark again. Tom, a question. If you turn off the battery disconnect switch and you're working on the electrical and you're in your mind, it's disconnected, right? The battery switch is off, and you accidentally touch a propane line with a hot wire or black wire, you're completing a circuit, right?
Correct.
So that could be really, really dangerous if there was a propane leak, or just if you just fry a piece of equipment, because there's a sneak path for that negative to go back.
I hadn't thought about that. You're right.
To me, this is a highly dangerous situation. And even if, I've talked to some people that say that this is done to protect the vehicle or the camper in an accident. But with that sneak path on the propane pipe, you're not protected at all, because there's a complete circuit here.
And what it means is your battery disconnect switch isn't really disconnecting anything.
No,
Did
not only is it an illusion, it's a dangerous one, right?
Yeah.
People think they're turning off the power and they're not.
One thing I'll say, and I mean, this is a great catch, and I hadn't thought of this, but I'm kind of wondering in the DC fridge if there aren't some relays in here that are doing something funky that might prevent some of what you're speaking about. But I still think it's, by default, I would assume that even if you disconnect, that there's some sort of creeping of current in unanticipated ways.
Yeah, just a question, have other people put in a positive or disconnect on the positive side? I did that. So I had both of them. You have the Northern Light battery disconnect switch, and right below it on the same panel there, I put in a disconnect for my positive side.
Yeah, I certainly did that in my setup. I went to a positive side disconnect with the
Yeah,
big red switch.
I would think that it would be most reasonable to have a DC positive and negative bus bar and one or both of those interrupted with a switch.
Yep.
And as far as boats go, that the big fuse on the battery has to be within 6 inches of the battery terminal. And those silly little auto reset relays, circuit breakers, you can't ever turn anything off, right? It's kind of silly and yeah, substandard in my opinion, but.
Well, and yeah, and I think we're playing by a better standard, and then there's just kind of the standard that most campers and RVs come with. So, so the fridge took care of the solar, and now the tricky one is these battery lines. In the battery lines, as it comes off the battery, it runs up. And then what I can't tell is underneath the floor, where does the 7-pin connector come in? And this is where I asked Keith, and he wasn't really willing to volunteer under the floor. Where does the 7-pin connector come in? But basically, this battery line is driving, and it's driving into that battery terminal on the PDI unit. And then, of course, it jumps the little copper jumper over to the loads output. And then that's how you're powering all of your loads. And then the double line here is to represent that there's a whole blizzard of independently DC fused wires coming out the back of the PDI, heading off to the different loads. And then there's a blizzard of grounding wires, presumably, that plunge under the floor somewhere, and they all connect into the white bat line and then make the return path to the battery. So when you're powering your system with the battery, there's your current loop going out this way, going out, and then coming back down through the disconnect switch into the battery. It's important to also kind of reverse things here and think about the scenario where the battery is discharged and you have shore power on, because now when you look at this view, when things are coming from the PDI, the set of current flows through all the wires is a little bit different. And so I'm actually going to show a diagram on that. You see, what other comments here? A little odd that on the battery wire, when you look up at that type 1 fuse, on the output side of the breaker, there are actually 3 wires connected to it. And with the help of others, and I've done some testing since, it looks like the little blue wire runs over to the Jensen clock, and the little black wire goes to the Winegard antenna amplifier. And why they chose to tap these off of this line versus just put these in as a properly fused thing off the PDI, I don't know. So it seems like an anomaly in their wiring strategy. So any questions on this?
That little breaker is in the battery box?
Yeah, all of these little hat symbols are the breaker, and they're in the battery box right there. And a matter of fact, if I point at the third one, you can see there are the 3 wires coming off of that middle breaker. So next, as I mentioned, when you have the battery as your power source, let's say you're drawing 15 amps out, well, you got 15 amps flowing up this way through the distribution panel and then making its return trip. And if you have the DC, if you have your fridge in DC mode, you have your 24 amps going out, coming back. All the wiring seems pretty reasonable. All the flows are straightforward. I found myself puzzling on this a bit, where if you upgrade to a lithium battery, which fundamentally wants to draw more current from the charger than a lead acid battery would, it's important to model this thing as a load. And so these are just kind of made up numbers just for the sake of getting people to think about it. But if you're plugged into shore power and your battery is dead, well, maybe you have something like 35 amps now flowing back on this battery wire to charge your batteries. You might have 10 amps, the other 10 amps flowing out to your loads, and then it's making a trip down through here. But the important thing is the return path for all of that current is unfortunately this single negative battery line here. And by my math, if you have 35 amps flowing this way, you've got 10 amps flowing this way, you could easily have 35 plus 10 amps flowing on this segment of negative wire. And at 45 amps, that's kind of pushing the limits of 10 gauge wire. And there is no fusing on negative side wires.
It's also pretty inefficient too, because the resistance of the wires of lower gauge wire is pretty high. Doesn't the PDI unit limit the output current to the battery?
I think it is, I think it's got a, I think it does voltage regulation and current regulation, and it limits total output to 45 amps.
Okay.
So I'm guessing if you have greedy lithiums, they'll try to pull as much as they can, but they won't be able to exceed 45 amps.
Yeah, so I have the Victron inverter charger, and it's rated at 80 amps for charging. And I will see 80 amps going through that. Now I've disconnected the 7-pin plug, so my question would be whether or not I might be seeing any of this backflow through the white wire, but I don't think so, because I have two, dedicated lines going between the inverter and the batteries. So I don't,
Okay.
Yeah.
So on the 7-pin, is there a diode somewhere in that circuit to prevent backflow of current from the PDI into the truck battery?
Based on the number of people that report dead truck batteries, I'd say no, unless somebody knows different. But I didn't see one.
Yeah, and I think the diode question was, there's drawing from, actually there are two questions embedded in there. As I understand it, with Ford pickup trucks, they're pretty good if you have the ignition off. There's a solenoid in there, so it'll pop the circuit, so you won't inadvertently drain your truck battery into the camper. And then I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the diode question, the concern is you have power back here, and you could be pushing that back into your truck battery.
Yes, yeah, that
And
was
so
my
you're
question.
trying to prevent that flow.
And I know Victron makes a unit that's got an SCR or something in it that will, when you're charging from your truck battery into your camper, it will shut off the current flow when the battery drops below a certain point.
That's right. And I'll show that in the wiring diagrams. In my case, because I ran a dedicated set of lines, I actually went to this type 1 breaker and I popped the wire off and taped it off. So I've basically completely disabled this pathway in my upgrade.
Can you tell me what a type 1 breaker is?
It's just a little plastic box. I think there's a thermal mechanism, and I think there's some other sort of mechanism, but basically as it heats up, it pops open, and when it cools down, it pops closed.
So those are you said before, they're the ones that are attached to the inside of the battery box. That's a type 1, you said.
Yeah, it's these little guys here.
Yeah. But so you pull your wire off on that all the time? Inside when you're trying to make sure you don't discharge your car battery, truck battery?
See, was there a question there?
Yeah, you said that you disconnect your wire on that when you want to make sure you don't drain your truck battery?
Oh, well, because I've abandoned the 7-pin aux connector altogether. And so I've plumbed all new wiring.
Yep.
And so I wanted to avoid ever running anything through this wire. So I actually disconnected it permanently.
But then you added this type 1 breaker.
No, the type 1 breaker has always been there. So
Okay.
Northern Light installed this breaker. So if you stare down right behind the hot water heater,
Yep.
where
Yep.
the aux line comes in, it
Yep.
goes into a type 1 breaker.
Okay.
And then this plunges down under the floor somewhere. And so I just didn't want a high current line coming into the camper and then the 7-pin line also coming into the camper and wondering about them colliding or power from one feeding back to the other.
Yeah.
Another way to deal with that 7-pin auxiliary power is what I did when we installed the camper was put a small relay in the battery or the truck fuse box connected to the ignition switch. So, and that controls the power to that 7-pin. So as long as the ignition is off, there's no power flowing in that 7-pin system.
And if you've got a Ford with upfitter switches, I think there's 40 amp breakers wired right into the upfitter, so you could just patch in there, and
Yeah.
that's super simple.
Yeah.
My 2019 Ford, right, it's off with the ignition off. In fact, if you open the door, it'll go off. So you have to be in the truck with the door closed, with it running before I get any juice going down that 7-pin.
Interesting comment. I had my camper run my truck dry one night, and so I'm in the process of installing a solenoid like Mark talks about.
So with my 2020 Ford, I don't need to be in the truck to run power. I've got my airbags run through my upfitters, and as long as the engine's on, everything's fine.
I'm missing your word. What are you calling it? Is it upfitter or aux?
They're the same thing. Aux switches or upfitter switches, they're same thing.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I have a Ram. It's got 4 or 5 of those. And as far as I know, one is being used. So that's what you would typically use those for?
You can use them for all kinds of things like winches,
Yep.
snow plows.
Okay, and you're saying that yours has a 40 amp breaker on it?
It has 4 25 amp circuits, and it has 2 40 amp circuits, and you can configure the 40 amp breakers so that they're even available when the truck is turned off.
Okay.
But by default, the engine has to be running.
All right.
So
Thank you.
I'll wrap up on this. So I've raised some alarms here by just saying, follow these current flows, and you might find that especially this negative bat wire, I think, is a little overloaded. That's where, voltage drops that naturally occur across these wires might lessen some of the concerns. And then at least when I wire things up, I'm trying to comply with, no more than 10% voltage drop, or even better yet, in some of the circuits, 3% voltage drop, which is lots of times when you look up what's the current rating of a 10 gauge wire and they say it's 30 amps, it's based on voltage drop thinking. They're saying if you want to stay under 10% voltage drop, you shouldn't exceed 30 amps on this kind of wire. But if you look at it from a temperature perspective, near as I can tell, there are 10 gauge wires that from a temperature perspective are rated for 60 amps. I personally wouldn't push that much amperage over a 10 gauge wire, but so there may be some headroom in this wire for handling a little bit more current. Unless someone wants me to bring it up, I won't. I'll just summarize. I've done an Excel spreadsheet And on the left side here, I basically, actually, I should just go ahead and bring it up just ever so briefly. That text is too small. This text is too small. What I've done in this spreadsheet, and this is already posted, I need to check. It should be posted to both groups now. But I've basically enumerated each of the fuses. And then like on fuse 3, what size it is, how it's labeled, and what's connected to it. And then I've also traced down how much each device draws. And in the case of like the CO2 sensor, it's always on, so I labeled it as a parasitic. And so I tried to track down all of the parasitic loads. And with this spreadsheet, what you can do is you can type in how many hours per day you use something. And then I'll go ahead and the spreadsheet will calculate what the amp hour usage is per day for that device. And for things like the fan at each of the different speed settings, I've figured out the amperage draw for those. We generally just put ours on the lowest setting, so we're probably drawing 0.13 amps, and we probably run it 10 hours a day just to keep air flowing. For your water flow, I figured out you could just type in the number of gallons that you use per day, and I put a formula in for figuring out how many amp hours you'll use. The furnace, you can enter in the number of hours, or if you want to look at your cabin temperature and just assume it's freezing outside, and then type in the number of hours you're trying to sustain, 70 or 60 or 50 degrees inside of your camper. I calculate the amp hour usage for you there. You notice there's some unused fuses in the fuse box, so this is a great place if you need to add a few new electrical items. And then knowing that people are typically adding USB ports or additional USB ports and inverters, I went ahead and just created a block here and put in the typical amp draw for these. So yeah, 2000 watt inverter pulls 189 amps. And that's figuring in the inefficiency of the inverter. So if you have any of these, you can kind of go ahead and use these entries there. There are a few things I haven't tracked down. So if anyone tracks these down, let me know. I'll fix up the spreadsheet. And then for the breakers, we've already gone over those, but it's just a little bit more detail about each of those wires and what they're hooked to and what the amperage draw is on each one of them.
When you were
All
looking at
this
the,
is so that you can go ahead and calculate what your amp hour draw is per day. So is there a question there?
yeah, I was going to ask when you were looking at the inverter, what efficiency factor do you use?
I think I picked 88% efficiency.
Thanks.
And, again, it's all kind of ballpark. Read the specs on whatever inverter you're eyeballing.
Yeah, and that 189 that you have there would be based on using 2000 watts. It's not
Yeah, if
sitting-
you were using all 2000 watts of this inverter, it would be pulling that.
Otherwise, you would be multiplying it by the factor that 88% or whatever.
Well, I guess if you were using a 1000 watts on the 2000 watt inverter, you might only be pulling half of this amperage wise.
Right.
So just 95 amps.
And if you're pulling nothing, you're still going to have some parasitic load.
That's
Yeah.
right. So with all of that, the whole goal was just to, as you fill these out, maybe for your summertime use and your wintertime use, you can get an idea of what your amp hour per day draw is. And then for giggles, I went ahead and broke out the parasitic draw. And I'm still suspicious this number is a little high, but it is a point that, man, there's some parasitic draw that's significant in the camper.
That's about what I've seen on my 811. I was seeing about 600 milliamps.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, which is, yeah, that's about 13 amp hours per day, which is crazy.
It is.
Now the battery disconnect though was turned on.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, so maybe it's better with the battery disconnect off.
And then just for giggles, I broke out what the furnace draw is, because certainly as you head into winter, this is the thing that can really hit your batteries hard. And then since entertainment is optional, hey, if I need to save a little bit of power during the evening, this is one of the things I would cut out. And then for giggles, I did try to figure out what's the worst case peak amps in terms of power draw that might be coming off your batteries. So if you turn on everything, I mean, you're running your jacks, your water pump, your DC mode fridge. I figure it's 131 amps. So as design guidance for your own system, you should at least build in and make sure you could tolerate that. Realistically, you're not running a bunch of things like your DC fridge and your pump and your jacks and the awning and all of that. So probably the worst peak that's going to be hitting your battery is about 61 amps. And again, this is just meant to be ballpark. This isn't, don't quote me on this.
Did you create 2 spreadsheets? I'm looking online.
See, what are you pointing at?
Looking online at the
Files.
site for your downloads, there's a Camper Power Calculator 191202, and then there's a Northern Light Camper Power Calculator 2008-17.
Yeah, I've uploaded several versions, and I've been kind of lousy at how to just keep one version up on Facebook. And so some of those are dated.
Right.
And then knowing that some people don't have Excel, I'm trying to get better about converting a version to PDF. And so even though it doesn't work as a live calculator, others can at least look at the numbers and with a pencil.
Google Google Sheets is really good at that.
Yeah, I probably ought to get this into Google Sheets.
Yeah, full disclosure, I work for Google.
Okay.
So I have a question about your max. So your worst case peak amps, that's not including the inverter, right?
I think in my case, I included that little baby inverter, that little 375 watt inverter.
Right. So I think with a 2000 watt inverter with the inefficiency, you'll be pulling close to 190 amps.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, just for giggles, let's say worst case peak amps, yeah, it jumped up significantly, 321. So what I had before plus the inverter. And kind of in the home stretch here, let me jump to this tab first. There's an interesting bunch of sites out there where if you type in your latitude, longitude, how you're mounting your solar cells, what kind of solar cells they are, it will calculate what your solar energy recovery should be by month. And I believe these take into account the average weather conditions for that location. And so what I did is I pulled numbers for a number of cities that I thought were kind of typical throughout the US. So a nice foggy Seattle, kind of sunny Boise, but it's still kind of northern tier. I had to do the Kelowna factory, Miami, Florida, and I think there's a Las Vegas down here. I went ahead and pulled the numbers for those cities. And if you want to, you can go into this thing yourself, pull numbers for your own location, and just go ahead and plug them into the My Custom Spot area. And that way you'll have them for the calculator on the first tab. And then I also went ahead and just added some charts of what the solar recovery looks like for a single 100 watt panel. And it's really telling because, come those winter months up in Kelowna, you're just not getting much power off those solar cells. But come summer, wow, it's great. And if you go down to Florida, it's a little more even. You're doing okay in winter and you're doing decent in summer. But the idea of this is, now that you've calculated what you need, you can now type in what you've installed on your camper, pick a month, pick one of those locations, and then it'll display what your solar output should be for a day. And then it'll take whatever your usage was, pull out the solar. And so this is the deficit that you're running per day.
And something people should be aware of is that with lead acid batteries, if you have 100 amp hour lead acid, there's really only 50 amp hours that are available. Because after that, the voltage will drop below 12 volts and it's
Yep.
pretty useless. Whereas with lithium, you'll get between 80 and 90% available.
So that's the
Thomas, just
calculator
the whole,
there.
spreadsheet was for your planning purposes, right? I mean, pretty much you're trying to figure out what size battery do I need, right?
Exactly. And,
So
and of
now
course,
that you've
go
so
ahead.
now that you've had your system in play for a year, how's the chart size up the real world situation?
Well, I was going to say that even without the calculator, I was finding it aligned fairly well with what I was seeing off my lead acid batteries. So when it was saying I should crash after about 2 days, I was really crashing in about 2 days. And with the lithium upgrade, I'm feeling like the calculator is pretty accurate as to what I'm seeing now. And it's been a huge improvement.
Cool.
I was thrilled at my last camping trip. I was down at 20 Fahrenheit and I was running the furnace a fair amount. And I was only using about 15% of my battery per day. So I was thrilled.
And how many amp hours do you have? You had 200 in your lithium setup?
Yeah, I have two 100 amp hour Battleborn. So yeah, 200 amp hours total.
Nice.
And this is more proof that I'm just a geek. I did run an experiment. I've posted all of this stuff before, but I put temperature probes throughout the Northern Light camper, down in the basement, up above. And then I ran a bunch of furnace experiments when it was freezing out. And so depending on your thermostat setting, I was able to figure out what percentage of the time the furnace is on, and also what the temperature is in the various spots within the camper. Part of the reason I point this out also is I do regret that I didn't put a temperature probe in the freaking battery box, so I could have seen what's the temperature in the battery box at freezing weather. But for most other areas in the camper, the crawl space and the basement areas, they're running 10 to 20 degrees cooler than the cabin temp. But it also means they're staying pretty warm.
So on my 811, I did put a temperature probe in the battery box, and I found it shockingly warm. Well, not
Really?
disturbingly, but really warm because it's right next to the furnace. That's the only explanation I can get. I can figure for it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because it's nice if you can put the batteries in the battery box.
Yeah, and it was like at minus 11C, it was well above freezing.
Okay.
And Dave, you're still running flooded lead acid?
Yeah, I'm running. We just got our camper back in October, so whatever the dealer gave me, we got our camper and hit the road. So drove across the continent.
I found with mine that I just use an infrared gun and the same thing. So there's going to be immediate heat drop, but typically when it's 20, 25 degrees Fahrenheit here, it's 45-ish in the battery box.
Hmm.
I think that could be a whole nother video conference session on how to better insulate a Northern Light.
Agreed.
So that's actually a really good point. If you want to insulate your battery box and you're running flooded lead acid, you got to be super careful about ventilation, because flooded lead acid give off hydrogen gas, and that has to vent.
Right. And flooded lead acid don't perform well in freezing temperature.
That's right.
So they actually want to stay sort of warm. So I think that's why they did it the way they did it.
Yeah, probably.
Have you guys noticed on the battery compartment? And I called the factory and spoke to them, and they said that it was they did this because they were worried about venting. Actually, they weren't. They were mandated by whoever governs them when they're building these things to create more venting. But in the frame of the battery compartment, you open the door and the frame has been cut away at the top and at the bottom. And this is a terrible source for water ingress. Have you guys seen that or found that or experienced water in there?
I don't have that on my 10.2.
I haven't seen that on my 811.
Now, is that for the battery box or is that for the propane fridge?
No, that's the propane fridge is kind of the same way, but it's for the battery box. And I have a 2021 811 as well.
Really?
Yeah.
So
you
so
know-
where are these cutaways?
Actually,
Yeah, I think it's the same thing as what you're talking about on the back of the fridge. When you open up that louvered door on the fridge at the bottom, they've cut away the frame to let water supposedly run back out again. It's
yeah,
designed because then there's all kinds of gaps in there.
Yes.
And it looks like the insulation, I just piled a bunch of marine sealant inside that area, inside my on the back of the fridge.
Yeah, darn, I don't quite catch it here. Here's the fridge, but yeah, there's that aluminum piece here and there are notches cut in it. And I want to think that was because if there's a propane leak, it needs a place to basically waterfall out of the camper. And if there's a lip there, the propane will stack up on the floor.
yeah, I understand that. I'm just going to show you a picture. I could probably screen share this, but do you see the cutout there?
Yeah, that's crazy. Is it just on the
I-
bottom?
Nope, top as well. So what I did was took a little piece of aluminum and
Filled it back in.
I filled it back in and then created a new gasket and I stopped the leak, but I'm wondering if I've, created some sort of an error now, not letting the battery breathe.
Does your battery box have a tube in the bottom so that
Drain.
liquid can flow?
Yeah, drain plug.
Does it have a drain plug?
No,
So
No,
maybe
mine
that's why
doesn't.
they did it. If they did away
Oh.
with it, they did away with the drain plug, and so then they cut away the frame so that the liquid would run out that way.
Yeah, I've got a vent on the bottom of my battery box.
Right.
yeah,
So going back to that battery box photo that you showed, and this is not electrical related, but I actually screwed in a block of wood onto those two plastic rails to stop the batteries from sliding back and forth.
right.
Because I could never get those straps down, and that door is just flimsy to the point of being useless.
It is, and I had the same problem. The batteries were banging up against the door and I had to replace the locking mechanism.
So I wanted to show you, if you got the lead acid batteries, I wouldn't do this, but when I put the battle boards in, I cut 2 slots in the back of the battery box, actually on the outsides. And I ran a ratchet strap outside the box, back into the box, and tied it so that the batteries are pushing up against the back wall of the box. And they haven't budged.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it worked out fine. I just used the multi tool and just made 2 slots on the side of the battery box. But again, that was with battle boards, not with the lead acid that you don't want to vent into the room.
Well, there are people that gotten to their location and they don't have any batteries left. Ouch. Say we're at the top of the hour. I was happy to go for 90 minutes. Just in terms of what else I have in this slide deck, there's kind of the thought process that I went through to decide to do lithium batteries. I think I could breeze through that really quickly, because then we can start to get to the fun point of here are actual diagrams, things that I've considered. And then what did I actually end up wiring up?
So can I just ask a question about the efficiency of the inverters again that you were using on that?
On the spreadsheet?
Yeah, it's something that I really didn't consider. So I'm wondering, how naive was I with it? But that's why I called in, right? To
Mhm.
gain from everybody's knowledge. So the Victron, this 2001 inverter that I have says that maximum efficiency is, let me move this so that I can see,
No.
92 to 94%. Do you believe that, or is that
I,
sales stuff?
I'm inclined to believe it. Generally, as the inverter gets larger, the efficiency goes up, is what I've seen.
Okay, because
But, we're also talking about a few efficiency points here or there, and at least for this spreadsheet, I was happy just to plug in a generic 88%.
yeah, so I went with Battleborn's recommendation on that. I mean, they recommended pairing the two
Yeah.
Battleborn 100 amp hour batteries with that inverter. And I get pretty good results with it. I can pretty much go 3.5, 4 days without, it going bad or shutting off. But just curious. So
Okay. So why don't I just real quick on my thought process. Obviously ID the power loads, and in particular ask what devices are required and not. And large inverters, hair dryers, coffee pots, air conditioners, those are big amp draw things. And so you need to decide, are these really important to you? Outside of, an RV park where obviously you can plug in and power those up. Oops, sorry about that. ID your power sources, and then I'm going to show you what my camping patterns and scenarios are. ID the battery options, pretty obvious. The cool thing about lithium over the other batteries is you typically are going to get 50%, or you're going to get twice the amount of usable power out of a lithium. And I've got some diagrams that show that. And if your opportunity to charge the batteries with high amp chargers is around lithium, you can charge lithium batteries a lot faster than you could with lead acid.
Yep.
And so for me, slam charging, as I think of it, was an important consideration. And certainly as I was upgrading, I looked at the wiring and felt that some better wiring was warranted. And then I wanted to, get rid of those type 1 breakers and go with better breakers and fuses. And then just an observation of mine is it seems like when you're down in the 1 to 2 battery bank territory, there are a lot of inexpensive standalone controllers. They work independent of each other. So an alternator charger, a solar charger, your shore charger. But as you start to step up into the larger battery banks, there's a new class of devices that you start to see where a lot of that's integrated together. And they work a little bit more intelligently. So if I understand a full-blown Victron system, for example, if you buy their battery meter and you buy their solar charger and you buy their shore charger, and I guess now if you buy their alternator charger, instead of each one of those devices trying to sense where the batteries are and make an independent decision as to how it should try to charge the battery, and sometimes they stomp on each other. In a Victron world, they'll all basically say, hey, battery monitor, why don't you be the single source of truth on where the battery charge is, and then just tell us whether we need to do our charging. And so it's an example of when you get into some of the larger systems and you start to buy some of these more intelligent networking devices and integrated devices, and they start to do a little bit more sophisticated stuff for you. So for me, the big deal was I tend to boondock a lot. When I'm in an area, I tend to take a lot of little short trips in the area. And let me see. I didn't want to deal with a noisy gas generator. And for my wife and I, we've decided, hey, when we're boondocking, we're not in an RV park, we just don't need those heavy draw devices. And so this is where this is what we do. And as far as how long I wanted the system to last. I was saying I wanted us to be able to boondock for 5 days out in the winter. And I wanted us to go at least 14 days in the summer with this kind of usage over here. And then if we pulled into an RV park, I wanted to make sure we could top off just in a single night stay. And that if we were driving for 4 hours or more, we could fill the battery bank. And then I think we've all experienced the little battery level meter that comes with the Northern Lights. You rocker it on, it says you're full, you're full, you're full. And then it suddenly says, oh, you're good, oops, you're empty. So I wanted a much more accurate state of charge system in my camper so that I could actually get advance warning that we were getting drawn down pretty low and time to react. And then a little bit of complexity I added to my setup is, even though the battery has a battery cutoff to protect it from damaging itself, I wanted a battery cutoff that I could program at, say, 20%. So if the power use drops down to 20%, I would just go ahead and turn the loads off as is so that I could leave a little bit of usable power in the batteries. And then by way of a simple reconfigure or using the Victron app on my cell phone, I could very quickly authorize the pull down of additional amps. So I can go from 20% and just basically say, sure, let's go down to 5% to get me through the night. And then I figured it was okay for me with lithium batteries if I had to warm them for the sake of getting them to take a charge. I figured as long as I had enough batteries in there to run the furnace for a little while to get the batteries up to temp, then I could get that charging process started. And so for me, with upgrading to 2 batteries, adding 2 more panels and getting to 300 watt of solar, and then upgrading to a 60 amp alternator charger, and upsizing my wires, basically I was getting real close to my 5-day camp and winter desire. And then come February, when the solar production is up a little bit, I was basically close to break even. And then from March on, I was in a situation where I had really plenty of power with the solar alone to power things. And matter of fact, April through September, even if I'm running my furnace like it was 32 degrees outside, I'm able to generate a surplus of energy. So I'm never running out of power at that point.
How big is the alternator in your truck?
It's a 200 amp alternator. And so I figured I can safely draw 100 amps without even beginning to worry about loading the alternator. And then you have some thoughts there?
Yeah, do you have 2 batteries?
I have 2 batteries.
Okay.
And so for me, a 60 amp charging rate on 2 batteries, I'm basically looking at 4 to 5 hours to charge my batteries up. And I
Oh,
figured
no, I was asking the flip question. Do you have 2 batteries in your truck?
oh, my truck. No, I just have the 1 lead acid.
Oh, okay. Okay. And a 200 amp alternator.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
Dave,
good.
You have a Ford, right, Dave?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I do too. So I have the, I think it was the snowplow option that gave you the dual alternator and dual battery.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish, we bought our truck and camper in kind of a panic, and I wish I'd better thought some of those options out.
Well, I don't know though, because I think what Thomas did was add a dedicated alternator for his situation, right? Right, Thomas?
Oh, for me, no. I've got the
No,
1.
no, I did not either. I have a 220 amp and I have 2 batteries in the truck and 2 batteries in the car, but it's stock in the truck. And then
Yeah.
I added the Renogy 60 amp DC-DC
There
charger,
you go.
and that will pull about 52 amps at peak. So, But when I'm driving down the road and it's pushing, 13.4 volts or whatever in the charge mode, it goes down to around 45 or so. So 45 seems to be its happy space. When it first starts to charge, it's up at around 52. And then it drops down again when it's actually doing the 14.4 at the, finish the top off.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the goals for me was what my buddy's doing, but he's doing it with AGM batteries. And but with the truck alternator is to be able to run DC on your fridge while you're going down the road.
Yep.
You don't have to use propane. And it sounds like, Joe, you've got enough amps there to be able to do that, right?
We
24
do,
amps.
yeah, we do. So actually I pretty much don't use the DC when I'm driving down the road. I use the AC, but
Oh, you're going through your inverter.
I'm
Yeah.
going through the inverter, yeah.
Hmm.
But maybe that's not the best way to go, but I always get wherever I'm going fully charged, so
Yeah.
it be an issue, so.
Yeah. That, if
Going
you
back
go
to the Ford though, the dual alternators, if you look up the Morton's on the Move,
Right.
he wound up, getting that Lance in the Ford Platinum Edition, and he had the dual amp alternator, the two alternators, and he had to do something to that because one of them, they don't work like you'd think they would.
Right.
Like one of them is off until something happens, and he goes into that a little bit. So
Yeah.
you may want to look at that. I don't know.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
watched it once. I'll probably have to watch it again. Right.
Yeah.
He's got a
Well,
lot of good diagrams and stuff too.
we're starting to enter the era of what they call smart alternators. And this is both for electronic vehicles and just for saving on gas mileage in general. And it's just thrown a monkey wrench in the kinds of things we want to do. And so it's why you can no longer assume that if the engine is running, the alternator is putting out 14.4 volts and that's it. And I haven't wrapped my head around where are the truck manufacturers in terms of switching over to these smarter alternators. But I probably should I need to speed through this a little bit. This is a scary diagram. I did this just a week or two ago. Everything is to scale, but basically there's my 200 amp hour lithium battery. I figure it's 2x usable to power, and I can't read because I'm blocked by the videos. So 4 to 8x faster charging. We go back to full screen there. But all of these boxes and all of these areas under the curve are to scale. And so what I was trying to show is this is a box whose size is 200 amp hours. Here's the 200 amp hours of flood leaded acid. And you can see the color coding, only about half of that box is now usable. And when you get down below 50%, you start to damage the battery if you get down into the 40% or below region. But what I was just trying to articulate here was if you look at shore power, before I did the upgrade, I was getting 19 amps flowing to my lead acid batteries. With the lithium and and switching to the lithium version of the PDI module, I'm now getting 38 amps reliably. So I've doubled my output on my shore power. More importantly, even with my 200 amp hours of lithium batteries, I only need a fraction of a stay at an RV park, a fraction of a night at an RV park to completely charge those batteries.
You're still charging at the 45 amp hours, right, through your converter? Or
Yeah, well, I'm probably charging, at 38. And to be realistic, I probably had to notch this down a little bit because I'm probably running some other things on the converter at that point that's stealing away some of these amps.
Yeah, okay.
But the point being is I normally stay at least 10 hours in an RV park. And within just a fraction of that time with the PDI, I'm able to fully charge the lithium batteries.
Yeah, because again, going back to my system, when I plug in, it cranks out at around 80 amps.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so like 1,000 watts going into it, roughly a little less. And it's pretty quick.
And then on the alternator, through the 7-pin, you can kind of see the scrawny. And by the way, this was just illustrative of me. I'm heading out to go camping somewhere, then I'm taking little day trips. And by the way, this is a 1 week's worth of time here. But with the old 7-pin, you can see how scrawny the production was. I just wasn't getting a lot of amperage flowing into the battery. And by going to the Sterling 60 amp unit, which realistically people are saying they're getting 55 amps out of it, you can see how much I've increased. And once again, if I'm just out driving for 4 or 5 hours, that's enough to completely fill my 200 amp hour box. And so I love the idea that if I'm running low, I can go out and take a short little road trip and basically refill those 200 amp hour batteries.
Does it charge at idle?
It does. It's supposed to.
Yeah, mine does.
Hey, Joe, before I forget, do you have a diagram of your system?
I do. Yeah, I can put it up. It's not as nice as Thomas's. So.
I'm a PowerPoint junkie, so never let that.
No, this is
Hand-drawn's cool.
You've done a good job here. This is really good.
Yeah, Joe, I appreciate, yeah, if you can share that, maybe you can put it on the Facebook files area there. That'd be great.
Yeah, I actually did my wiring diagram using blocks in Word. So that's how bad it is. So, but it still gives you the point.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, Thomas, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. So the big point, my winter and summer needs were this. I've got the lithium batteries that have this kind of capacity. I have these 3 charging sources that are capable of putting this stuff out. And so for me, in the winter, I'm running a deficit of about 50 amp hours a day. If I'm not plugged into shore or running the alternator, but come the summer with just solar alone, I'm probably running a surplus of, over 50 amp hours a day. But I also just want people to realize the magnitude of power coming off of these 3 different charging sources.
Yeah, you upgraded to 300 watts. I think a lot of people have the 200 watt system out there. You think that would be enough?
For the summertime use, yeah. I mean, in retrospect, if I was just a summertime camper, I probably would have been fine putting 200 watts on the roof and sticking with lead acid or going to AGM. And we've certainly seen some of the people in the Northern Light group that have, I think they're pushing 600 watts of panels. I was just a little worried about panels on the leading edge, given that I go down logging roads with tree branches, and
oh yeah,
I was worried about those catching. And I think the final thing for this section was just, I called it charger right sizing. And it was the idea that the recommended charge rate for lithium is 0.5 C, which basically you take the capacity of your battery in amp hours and multiply it times 0.5 C. It says that you should only be pushing 100 amps max into this 200 amp hour battery bank, 50 amps of battery. And that's the recommended charge rate. And that's the point at which, you're optimizing the life of the battery and the cycle life, the calendar life and the cycle life of the battery, if you can keep it under 0.5 C. With Battleborn, you can go up to 1 C, but then you're just starting to be a little hard on the lithium battery. And so this was just me marching through what I had as a shore charger at 45 amps and basically saying, hey, I can charge in a single night in an RV park. And so going with a larger charger, at least with 200 amp hours total, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're going with more batteries, you might want to upgrade the charger. With the alternator at 60 amps, I'm still well below the recommended charging rate, so I'm safe there. And with a partial day drive, I'm topping them off. If you wanted to charge a little faster, okay, maybe you want a bigger than 60 amp charger unit there. And in solar, the answer is always, gee whiz, I wish I could get more solar on the top. That's always a good answer. You can never have enough of that. And then just a little exercise I did do is, because lithium batteries have BMSs, or a lot of them do, I wanted to just run the math. What happens if one of those batteries cuts off? Is there a chance you could overload the remaining battery and be shoving too much power at it for its own good? But even with 100 amp hours, at least with these chargers, I run no risk of overwhelming a single battle-borne battery. So with that, unless we really want to plow on, I'm thinking I need to call a follow-up session, because that's where we could really get into looking at specific chargers. I mean, these are some of the slides I had, what Northern Light had. One of the things I considered, the Renogy thing I considered, the battery combiner approach that a lot of people consider. A lot of people are going with the Victron MultiPlus. I'm kind of envious of the people who managed to find a way to fit that in, but I thought it was overkill for me. And then we could talk about what I actually ended up installing in my camper. And then we can get into this gnarly diagram of what's all of the wiring. But I'm thinking it would probably be best to do this in a follow-on session. How does that sound to people?
I've enjoyed
Yeah,
this.
absolutely.
Okay.
And maybe we can put together a wiring diagram for Northern Light.
Yeah, I'm in all my years as a technologist for Hewlett Packard, I've worked on standards bodies, and I've always been about trying to not only describe what the product is, but trying to enable other people to innovate on top of that.
Yeah.
And knowing that not everyone, well, realizing you can't build a product that satisfies everyone. So if you can describe a few other things that let people extend it, that can be really helpful for your own brand.
Yeah.
For them to have a story of, we're upgrade friendly and we'll provide you a few tips. If you screw up, it's on you, but.
Yeah, I gave them a call, and I spoke to Keith, and his comment was, well, we don't really want you working on it.
Yeah.
I said, okay, so then do your dealers have wiring diagrams? And he said, no, not really. And I just thought, man, oh man, I mean, my line of work was always to do factory acceptance testing on different pieces of equipment, and you ring stuff out, and it's just surprising. They have to have a diagram.
Yeah. I also just kind of wonder if various vendors are a little embarrassed about what they've actually done under the hood.
Yeah, yeah, probably.
But
I think the trick to completing your diagram, Thomas, is we're all going to have to climb into the nether regions and find those missing, what did you call them? The terminal hub.
Yeah.
As far as
Those missing splices.
Yeah. And I know that if I could just tear the floor out right through here, you could probably find the answer. But
Just how many people here have lithium? I mean, Thomas, you do, and Joe, you do?
Yeah.
And Daryl, you're like me, still on
Yeah,
flooded lead acid?
I just got my camper in September. I took it out for a few trips. One was a week long, and then another, I was way back in the bush doing some fishing, and that's when I realized that I had a problem when I woke up in the morning. Luckily, I had a generator, and I could charge my truck batteries and get that started. And then, whatever I've got in there, or I know what I've got in there, they've got the 2 6-volt flooded golf cart batteries. And
Okay.
it's not great.
And I guess, Dave, you're still on flooded lead acid.
Yeah, I got whatever the dealer put in. That's 2 12-volt, 85 amp hour.
Yeah, that's
that
like
sounds
me,
pretty typical.
And I
They
guess
put
we
in
have an
2 for you.
Gary
Wow.
Allen.
I got 1.
Yeah, I don't know why they did that.
I got one when I got it, but it wasn't. One of them wasn't. I mean, I got 2. But one of them wasn't working. So they were 16 months old, but so something happened to it. But that was kind of the decision point. My converter wasn't working and one of the batteries was dead. So it was kind of like, yeah, all right, what am I, anyway, so I went down the other route.
Okay, well, I will schedule a follow-up meeting. Is this time okay with everyone? I know for me it is, but is,
Should be.
Yeah, works good.
Yep,
okay, there's
Yep,
never a
per-
perfect time,
for me.
Don't make it on Super Bowl Sunday.
but
Oh, God, no.
what's
Well,
the
actually,
Super
it's
Bowl?
okay, it's actually
actually,
okay, because the Seahawks lost yesterday, so I don't care.
Very
Well,
impressive.
hey, good
Thomas.
job
Thank
on
you.
this, BZ.
Yeah, well, thanks for the input too. I'm learning too.
Yep.
It's good stuff.
Yeah,
All right.
really good. Thank you.
Great. Good talking with
Okay.
everybody. See
Bye,
you around.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
So long.